Hey guys, welcome to the Double Doc Talk Show. Today we have George Pardos. Yep, he's from the Veterans Radio Syndicate. And me and him were catching up a few months ago, actually, about a pretty interesting subject. We will maybe highlight a little bit about that, but that's kind of how we met. And one of the things that we were talking about, of course, is himself and the veteran community as a whole. You know, the different ways that more are serving in different aspects, and sometimes we could really highlight different services and different people within the military otherwise, right? So me and him hit it off really well. You know, we were talking about the past, a little bit about wrestling, a little bit about the Marine Corps, me being a corpsman and him being a devil dog. It's one of those things that you kind of just connect randomly and efficiently. It's one of those deep connections real quick. They call it fast friends, right? And so after talking to him a bit, I wanted to get him on the show a bit to introduce himself, what he does, of course, with Veteran Radio Syndicate, and the how and why did we get there. So I'll let Georgios kind of introduce himself. Hey, Georgios, how you doing today?
Oh, just peachy, man. How you doing?
I'm up. I'm on my feet. That's
first thing I wanted to say, thank you for having me on, and thank you for giving an opportunity to get our message out and see what we're doing. Tell you a little bit about my background. Was a Marine veteran. I wrestled for the Marine Corps, and I was on the All-Marine team in 87, 88. In 1988, I represented the Marine Corps at the U.S. Olympic trials in Greco. So, amazing. So that was my background. I went in the Marine Corps actually because I wanted to wrestle. I grew up, martial arts and doing wrestling and judo. And so in 87, I had the opportunity. I tried out for the team in 86 and I wasn't good enough. Was not strong enough. I was just barely 20 at the time, and they had men. I mean, my training partner at the Marine Corps team was Greg Gibson, who was 84 silver medalist. I had Ron Carlisle, I had Craig Pittman, LaRock Benford. We just had animals. So in 86, I went back overseas, went on a Westpac, did nothing but lift. That was it. I did, spent my time in the weight room. Then in 87, I qualified to go to the team. And it was a different experience back then. And I will say this, I don't know what the Marine Corps is like today. They cut the wrestling program, even though we had an Olympian, a few years ago in the Marine Corps. And my roommate at Quantico was Buddy Lee, who was the 1992 Olympian. For almost 25 years, they didn't have a single Olympian, even though the Marine Corps has been one of the best wrestling programs in the military. Butch Keiser, who was the first African-American to win a world championship for the United States and first African-American to win an Olympic medal, was a Marine, Captain Butch Keiser, Captain Lloyd Butch Keiser. In 76, he was second in the world. Second at the Olympics. So the Marine Corps is a lot different today. I think since the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, they've focused on being more, combat oriented. So they've cut a lot of the programs where the Army has not, and the Army has the world-class athlete program. So it's a little bit different today. But it gave me an opportunity I got a scholarship to wrestle at Ohio State, went in the Army Reserve, and I actually wrestled for the U.S. Army team in 97. So it was a great experience. And I will tell anybody about this. If you wrestle, if you take a look at the UFC, if you wrestle, wrestlers determine where the fight stands. If you ever get in a fight, a wrestler would determine whether the fight is on the ground or standing up. And, John Jones is a prime example of that. John Jones was a JUCO national champion, and, it's, prime example. So it's a great sport. And so one of the things that, going to what we're doing now with Veteran Radio is we started a nonprofit called On Target for Vets. And basically we're taking the techniques that we use to, I've coached 3 Hall of Fame, UFC Hall of Fame MMA fighters, Mark Coleman, Kevin Randleman, Pat Miletich, and we're using some of that training technique we used at Ohio State. I also coach at Ohio State, so we're using some of that technique to help veterans that are injured and don't know where to start because they have maybe pain aversion. You have, a bad shoulder injury, knee, hip. We're showing you some technique to get better so you can improve your, quality of life, but also mobility.
That's beautiful, man. And
Yeah.
what is the name of the nonprofit again?
On Target for Vets.
On Target for Vets. That's amazing because I've been going through a lot of physical therapy lately. I had a really bad fall back in beginning of September and another one this past week, sadly enough. But me and my wife are very adamant about getting my ass back on the mat. We have a set of wrestling mats that when things were going a little bit better, I was able to do a lot of mobility, exactly what you're talking about. Get those tendons and ligaments moving. If you have nerve stuff, I'm learning that the more and more that you move, right? There's a whole saying about the rolling stone gathers no moss, right? And this whole technique that you're bringing into the atmosphere with, I'm sorry, I'm going to need it again. On Target?
For Vets.
For Vets. There we go. On Target for Vets. That's something to me that is really going to be beneficial, especially in this new wave of how veterans kind of communicate and engage. So you're hitting it really well, twofold, with the Veteran Radio Syndicate and the On Target for Vets, right? Where you're amassing this potential where people can engage. And that's something where I see is the most important. So you kind of glazed over a bit with your wrestling experience, and I love that. It really speaks volumes to your character. It usually means people are super humble, and I love it. So you were competitively wrestling for the United States Marine Corps.
Yep.
This was in the 80s, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And when you're not transferring, but serving in the Marine Corps as a wrestling team, right? How did that work out? Because it's one of those things that I didn't know going through the military service that there was a competitive wrestling programs. I thought it was just, guys messing around or, having a good old time with McMap or whatever. But no, I was ignorant to the opportunity. So how did you come about? And I know that the opportunity is gone for the Marine Corps, but in any military service, how did that come about?
Well, at the time, so I'm going to go back. I don't know how it is today, so I can't speak for how the services are for the Marine Corps is today. Because when Jason Lukitas was a coach, they changed around. But up until the last maybe 10 years, they used it as a recruiting tool. They used wrestling and athletics as a recruiting tool. And so what they did in the 80s, what they had was that you had tryouts for the team. And there was, I think, like 13 different sports, anything from track and field to boxing to, I think there was, powerlifting, there was a team. So you had teams for the branches. And so what you did was they had tryouts and they had an open tournament where you could go and compete, and they would take the top, basically the top two in the tournament would go to the team. So all you had, you had to make it to the finals. Well, that's how it worked then. And so once you got on the team, we trained at Camp Pendleton until you went to Quantico. So Camp Pendleton, from basically in the mornings you trained, you went to lift, you did conditioning with your team. We did from 1300 to 1600 for about 3 hours. You had to work at the gym, basically, at the special services, you worked at the baseball fields. You did something that was, part of the MWR. Then at 1700, we had practice. And then you had to qualify for the next level of service, which is a Quantico. So when you went to Quantico, all you did all day was train. So when we were at Quantico, we worked with Marine Corps Recruiting Command, and we would host clinics. So about once or twice a month, you would go to a local high school. You would do a clinic. There's a video of it up on YouTube, and you would show people how to wrestle. Just do it. And then you'd have a Marine recruiter there, And during our time in 88, in the 6 months we did this, we had 20 Marines, or I don't know what you want to call them, 20 poolies, or we had 20 people enlist in the Marine Corps based on the clinics that we held. So it was a recruiting tool. It was basically, hey, we're going to use this as a recruiting tool to come into the military and show, hey, there are things, you can be a war fighter, but you can also be, an athlete for the services. And you got to remember, 2 of the 3 guys that knocked out Muhammad Ali are Marines, Leon Spinks and Ken Norton. So, and both of them did box for the Marine Corps.
That's awesome. See, that's
And,
that's amazing to me, dude. Like that rich history. But go on, I really want to hear more.
and so the naval team,
Mm-hmm.
the naval team was at Coronado. It was the U.S. Navy wrestling team was at Coronado at San Diego Naval Base. They had a team at Coronado.
Mm-hmm.
One of my buddies, Mike Carolyn, was was on the team, and they had a really good program. The Army team was at Fort Benning, Georgia. The Air Force team was at Colorado Springs. So they had a really good program where, and again, what they did, it did 2 things. One, it recruited. It was free recruiting, because they, in the past, you have had Marines who have been Olympic athletes that have gold medaled.
Uh-huh.
And this was one of those systems that they used for it, was basically that they used this to recruit future Marines. And just like, I know you're a corpsman, and I know this might not, you might not, be familiar with it, but the naval at the time, and I don't know if it exists now, because like I said, there's so much has changed the last 10 years in the military. It's hard to keep up, but there used to be a corpsman to doctor program that you can enlist in the Army. I'm sorry, you could enlist in the Navy as a corpsman. And during that time, you would act as a corpsman. You would go to school as an undergrad at the university, and then they would send you to, if you got your degree, it would, it was a 6-year enlistment. If you got your degree and you went through that path, they would send you to a medical school, and you would become an officer, and they would pay that. And in the Marine Corps, it was called the MESEP program, where you could apply for active duty, go to college, you'd be paid as an E5, and then you'd come back as an officer. A lot of the programs that over the years, they've tried to see what works, what doesn't, what works as a recruiting tool.
Mm-hmm.
And so they look at, what is the best serve now, since, the global war on terror, OIF, OEF, most of it is, they haven't done as much because they've needed, personnel on deployment. And I think, as last numbers, I don't know if they're, the last numbers that we saw were over 3 million over 3 million people were deployed to Afghanistan and to Iraq combined. Jesus. So that's a lot of personnel to deploy over that time. So, the military has limited resources, of course, so, it's, again, it's where is the priority? And, during peacetime, you probably get a few more bennies than you do during war,
That's so true. But that's so true. That's the hardest part about balancing in leadership. And that program, the MESIP program, and the Corpsman to Doctor program, I've heard of a few dudes doing it. I've also heard a few dudes doing PA school and stuff like that. I was on something similar to it, but not a dedicated track or pipeline. I went to advanced lab tech school to get my chops up for the lab portion of medical school. And a lot of the lab tech guys that I graduated with eventually I would say at least 2 or 3 of the guys within the whole community, and I'm pretty sure a few females, ended up becoming doctors through that pathway, kind of being the enlisted to the officer to the doctor, which is amazing. And you're right. It's not just, to me, it's not just a recruitment tool. We got to look at this as a retention tool too, you know? I didn't know that the wrestling programs were this competitive, right? Actually having Olympic placement and competition, right? That's to me amazing, because growing up here, well, not here, but right now I'm in Valley Center, but growing up in California, in Lemoore, California, Lemoore was a very competitive wrestling school, neighborhood, everything. And that was because of Coach Kent Olson, right?
Right.
And he brought a lot to the table for those programs, even the youth program. That's when I met him, when I was about between 9 and 10 years old, early 90s. And it was called the Farm Boys. And that wrestling team, you know, Kent was always dedicated from the youth to the middle school to the high school. And then he went to the colleges, and now he's doing something amazing and all this wonderful stuff. But the competitiveness that wrestling brings to the table, and the spirit of the individual, the character that it molds, to me, that's excruciatingly valuable in the military, no matter what money is being spent, where or why, because you have to be able to really emulate the ethos and the philosophy of what it means to serve, right? So wrestling to me is the same thing that, you know, service was for me, where it was this very dynamic relationship of self and ego and competition and a challenge. And so this is kind of the exciting part of the conversations that I like to have, right? So for you, when you went back to service, and then you got out or transitioned into the Army wrestling team, how did that go about?
Well, so to give you a little background, I wrestled at Ohio State from 88 to 93. And we had a club program where for the international, it was called the Buckeye Wrestling Club. So we would compete and wrestle, and I was part of the coach. So in 97, they were short of people. Now, understand something too. In the 90s, early 90s, after Desert Storm, and when Clinton got elected, they cut a lot of personnel. I don't know if you're familiar with that. They had a reduction in forces. And so in 97, they needed a heavyweight at the time. And I said, hey, I was in the reserves. And they were like, I'm eligible. So I wrestled for the team, went to the U.S. Open for the Army. So it was, they just reached out to me, went down and trained at Fort Benning. So it was a very interesting time. Now, the one thing with the Army team is they're better funded, and the Army has better support because, then they had started the world-class athlete program, which developed a guy. One of the guys that they developed was Dremel Byers, who was world champion in Greco, and he came from the Army. That was a few years after me. And they had a lot of more success. The Army uses that as a tool, and they're better suited for it, because a lot of that's how they kind of came up with the 18X, the 18X program, which you sign up for to be special forces. They kind of looked at kind of like the same thing. The Army had a program where you can enlist in the Army and go to the wrestling team. Mike Van Arsdale, Rex Holman were two guys that they did that with. So the Army has more resources, and
Yeah, they do.
And
yeah, they do. They're better at leveraging them.
Well, here's the thing: is that the Army has corpsmen, they have chaplains, they have the Army by itself doesn't rely on another branch to. And I read somewhere, and I don't know if this is true or not, but the Army has more boats than the Navy does. And, so they can deploy by themselves. They can, where the Marine Corps needs, they need corpsmen, they need chaplains, they need, where a lot of that. But so the Army uses that as a better recruiting tool. Now here's the take on it. They did a Manpower Act in the late 2010, I think 10 or 12. They looked at all the background of every JSOC operator. Mm-hmm. Three things came to mind, and three things you would not think of. The average height and build was 5'10", 183 pounds. They were a wrestler, and they came from a small town that had a population of under 50,000 people.
That's so solid.
That was the three vectors that they kind of decided what, and so wrestling is built, and what they've realized is that more wrestlers complete Ranger School, BUDS, an SF selection, or the Q course than any other single demographic. Now, they have other demographics, but those are the three things that seem to be a tie, mm-hmm. or have like to be
consistent.
A consistency. Yeah. So and wrestling is there, and so you take a look at places across the U.S. You're a small town. What is there to do? You either play basketball. You're going to play a sport, and hopefully,
yeah.
and wrestling. Wrestling is American sport. So you look at, and I'll say something about California. It's funny. California has developed some really good, like Stephen Neal out of, Cal State Bakersfield, Henry Cejudo, who comes from Los Angeles, of all places. You would not think that a gold medalist wrestler would be from LA, where that's not a sport. That's not a sport. That's not an association you would make with.
Yeah.
And and you take a look at the guys that have grown up in, the Diaz brothers out of Stockton. You have a lot of wrestlers that come out from California, even though you would not, California leads the NFL in players. More football players are in the NFL from California than any other state, and yet they have developed a consistent array of wrestlers, that have been successful.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that when I was going through a course as a kid, and we would go to these wrestling clinics, like up in Oregon or out in, I want to say Reno, and all these different places, right? I didn't realize just how, not just like well known, like Kings County and the entire region, like you were mentioning, Stockton, and I was actually born in Stockton. And,
were you really?
Yeah, I was actually born in Stockton, right there at St. Joseph's Hospital, and so we ended up in Lemoore. But I never knew that wrestling was this thing in California, let alone the rest of other states. I was just kind of this kid. I was walking in. I really enjoyed the wrestling. I really enjoyed the camaraderie. I really enjoyed the sport. And when it came to high school, at the end of the high school, phase, whatever you want to call it, I was profoundly ignorant on how to leverage and utilize any sport, because I also did football, which was funny. I varsityed in both sports all 4 years, I think, except maybe one for football. And did the whole 4 years, NJROTC, all this stuff. And I just didn't know how to leverage this stuff, right? These things as a kid into any kind of program for further education or development until it was many, many, many years later in the military, of all places, after deployment. And I'm sitting there going, well, what the fuck am I actually going to do with my life?
You think about this. Okay. I mean, you think about this. The Schultz brothers, right? Mark Schultz and Dave Schultz, mm-hmm. Olympic gold medalists, are from Palo Alto High School. Now you think about, when you think about Palo Alto, you think about the tech court.
Yeah.
You would not think that Palo Alto would graduate to arguably two of the top 10 wrestlers America's ever had. but they went to my roommate, my teammate, Greg Gibson, who was an Olympic silver medalist, is from Shasta High School in California. Stephen Abbas. There's a lot of talent that came from California, even though, you don't think of California as a wrestling school. And I got to tell you, I got to tell you a funny story. So one year when I was coaching at Ohio State, I coached Ohio State from 01 to 06. We went out.
Nice.
We went to a tournament in Poway. I don't know if you know where.
I know exactly where I live. Literally like 45 minutes from it right now. We used to wrestle them all the time.
Yeah, so Poway has a really good team. So we go to see these two kids, and we were looking for a 26-pounder at the time. And so there's this match between a kid from Poway and from a kid from Poway and a kid from La Jolla Shores. End of the match, the kid from Poway beats the other kid 28-22.
Jesus.
It looked like these two kids were just taking, there was no defense in the match whatsoever. They were just trading points back and forth. And it was like one of the best matches I've ever seen. Kid shoots a takedown, rolls him, hits a twill, the kid rolls out, gets up. They just went at it. It was like, it was an amazing match. And what's funny about California is, and especially wrestling, is now they have beach wrestling, which has become very popular. They have it at Huntington Beach. They have the
That's so dope. I didn't know they had that.
Yeah, and it's become really popular. The scoring is a little different. First person to 3 points wins. But with the advent of MMA and the wrestling has picked up. Now they have girls wrestling in California.
It's very competitive too.
And then so one of the girls that I trained, Amita Lore, is from San Francisco. She just won the gold medal at the last Olympics.
Holy shit, that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, and then so there's a growth in wrestling because it doesn't cost. So it doesn't cost that much to field a wrestling team. Short shoes, pair of shoes. It's less than $200.
Yeah.
You don't need that much. You need singlet, warm ups. So all you need is wrestling mats, and you don't need.
You don't need new ones.
Yeah.
That's something that's really helpful.
And that's part of it. Part of the other thing is with MMA taking off, people have realized that wrestling is an integral part of it. And so now they've started to, even the people that don't wrestle have started to wrestle.
It's become more mandatory.
Yeah, where before you could just stick with BJJ, but that doesn't get it done. And the people that have really made a push for it are the Dagestanis, because Khabib and them.
That's right.
They're like, well, brother, I smash your guy. No. So they've developed where you have to wrestle because these guys are going to take you down, and if you don't know how to wrestle, you're going to get smashed.
Yeah.
And then so if you, and the thing about this, and I know this might rub some people the wrong way, but in countries that have Sambo, there's no BJJ. And so we did Sambo for the Marine. I did Sambo for the Marine Corps also. I kind of were, but the countries that have Sambo, very rarely do you see a BJJ practitioner, because they'll, it's the same thing with, the Dagestanis again, right? Sambo is, is just basically Russian judo. The guy that invented Sambo was a judoka in Japan, went back to Russia and taught it. So again, it goes back to, you have to learn how to grapple. and you got to have a wrestling coach. You got to have, and so it has, and the other thing is too is that with the, with people like Bob Anderson, who's from California, and Gene LaBelle, who's from California. I don't know if are you old enough to know who Gene LaBelle was?
I don't remember shit, bro. My brain's been bumped, rattled, and shook
So
so
Gene
much.
LaBelle,
Like I'm trying to remember people as we're talking, right? And I'll bring them up, but I think I got only like 3 or 4 dudes.
But Gene LaBelle was a judoka that lived in Torrance and lived in LA.
Okay.
And he started training, he trained Ronda Rousey. He did, had Jimmy Pedro was from California. So the thing is that you cannot compete in MMA today without being able to wrestle and get on the mat. You just can't.
Yeah.
By the way, you see those 2 flags hanging behind me?
Yes.
So those are from I wrestled a guy from Cuba who his name is Hector Milian. And Hector Milian is a freak of nature. He was a gold medalist in Greco, and we traded some stuff afterwards, and it was one of the, he was a good guy. He was just phenomenally strong. But one of the things about if you could wrestle, you're not going to get bullied.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of it. And, McMAP, basically, the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program has taken a lot from wrestling, a lot from, combatants and done all of that. So with that being said, I think it's a huge move to basically making sure that, if you are in the field or in it like that, that you don't get, if you have to get into a combat situation where you're wrestling, you're not going to get, squished.
I think that's really everything about I grew up saying it wasn't like a mean laugh or anything like that. It was more of a there's profound levels to all of these interactions that we participate in at all those different things. And I saw the wrestlers a bit with a couple guys that were in BJJ too, just roughhousing and stuff and on the mats and whatnot. And they were always just kind of like taken aback, like, dude, if you finesse just a little BJJ into this shit, you'd be very competitive. And I'm like, that's not my goal. I'm not trying to
Right.
be a mixed martial artist or anything like that. But it was one of the passions that had me near miss the Marine Corps as just a Marine. And that was because when I was going through school and I did all this stuff with NJ and all this, sports activities and wrestling especially, the Marine Corps dude was like, hey, you can be a combatives instructor. And that was kind of the only knowledge that I had going in at that point. And hopefully it would have ran into something, different. But honestly, I'm glad that my dad spoke up and was like, hey, do you have any kind of medical programs? And the dude goes, no. And the Navy sailor dude picks his head up and just goes, hey, you ever hear about FMF Navy Corpsmen? And I was like, no, but that sounds dope. And the sergeant was like, all right, yeah, I see this. This is going to be dope. And so I left and was signed up with the Navy dude. And me and the sergeant dude was smoking a nice little cigarette afterwards. And he was like, dude, just have fun, be yourself. You're going to dominate. And that's true. The Navy to me physically was something that has great room for improvement. No matter what people want to say, that's the way I look at, and most wrestlers probably look at a lot of things. We don't hyper glorify ourselves in the wins. We kind of look at what what our mistakes were, and we go, all right, how do I get better at this? How do I touch up on that? How do I improve on the overall, not just performance, but my aggressiveness? Am I gassing? Am I this? Is it that? Am I not working my shot? That was my weakness. But I wrestled heavyweights and I weighed 185 pounds. And so it was one of those mixes where I am very timid to take a shot because the dude outweighs me very much so. And a lot of the situations, Kent, would you be like, shoot, and I just look back at him like, dude, you crazy. because the dude's like 6 foot something. Jeremy Ingstrom was one of the dudes I grew up wrestling against that I remember. He ended up playing football, I think, for Washington State. And the last I heard of him was randomly. I just got back from deployment. Yep, just got back from deployment. And one of the it was before I left for the deployment. However it works, one of the ladies I worked with in 5 North, she was HM3. She had dated him in high school, and she remembers me when I knocked him out during a wrestling match. And I was like, "What?" And I go, "Yeah." She goes, "You were the dude that knocked his ass out during homecoming in Lemoore." I think it was homecoming. And I'm like, "Yeah." And I was terrified of this because I'm now in the military for X amount of years. Here's this random HM3, and we're talking about wrestling from high school days. And I'm like, yeah, this is how the sport kind of works, though. It proliferates into a lot of different communities. You don't know anything that's really going to resonate more than wrestling and wrestlers. Like what you're saying about the female teams. We heard of a tournament here in the high school here in Valley Center. We went in. I didn't know it was an all-female wrestling tournament. The competition level...
Yeah.
I was just blown away.
And I'm going to tell you, I want to touch up on that. When they started female wrestling, the competition was not very good. It was not very good.
That's what I remembered of it.
And you didn't see a lot of like women hitting a lot of the high dives. It wasn't very high level. Mm-hmm. Now, if you put a champion from today against a champion from back in the 90s, they would just absolutely
annihilate them.
Yeah. Annihilate them. There was just not that level. Now, you have here's part of the other thing too is that now people are making money from sports. Wrestlers are actually getting NIL money. Now in the fall this year, everybody begins with 37 scholarships, where that was never, back in, up until 2 years ago, it was 9.9. So with the NIL money, with the NIL money, you're just going to have a proliferation of programs. And right now there's only around 80 Division I wrestling schools, where there used to be a lot more. And I don't know if that's going to expand or detract. Football, of course, is king.
That's something I really experienced in high school. Was our wrestling team was divisional champions for like 24 some odd years in a row, right? And our football team hadn't won a game in I think 4 years in a row. Okay, and the same attitude though towards football, we never got that support for the wrestling team. And I noticed that a day and night difference, because when the football team started winning, they were literally getting a lot of the team guys, my guys, right, on the line, D line, and the running backs and everybody else, and even our safeties, right? They were all on the wrestling team. All of our football players were essentially on the wrestling team at some point. Lorenzo Neal. Okay.
I wrestled him.
Fuck awesome. Yeah. For real? That is so fucking dope, because
I wrestled Lorenzo. I wrestled Stephen Neal. I got to tell you, what's funny is that Ray Lewis was a wrestler, number 52 for the Ravens. Mm-hmm. He was a wrestler. So
he hit like it.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said about wrestling and transitioning into other sports, and one of the things that was funny, and I got to tell you this, there's a guy that you will not know who I'm talking about, because you're just a little a couple cycles back, but I was on ship as a Marine. And there's a guy I wrestled with in high school named Napoleon McCullum, who wound up, he was a wrestler and actually went to the Raiders, but he was an officer in the Navy.
Oh, wow.
And so it was but going back to, a lot of the stuff that happens, you how to you just don't realize how some of these people that are that played sports are he just I don't know, man. It just you don't realize that they had I don't know, whatever you want to call it, that it transitions to other successes in life.
Absolutely. Like the lessons learned, it really does. It transcends into so many different things. And I see that to the day, right? My wife and I have gone through the most tumultuous of transitions from active duty to being a civilian for the past 15 years. And just getting basic things, right? I see it as a wrestling match, right? A challenge to rise to. How do I get better at articulating, communicating? Like I was telling you how podcasting for me was. How do I take my shot? How do I set up a good head and arm? How do I sip a Jap Wizard? How do I set up a double leg? How do I use these things that Coach Olson taught me and beat into my fucking head, right? Muscle memory was don't give up, change levels, be 10 steps ahead, right? Understand that it's all a mental game. And if you can show up and put into every effort that you have on that mat, that you learned in the room, that you've been putting together every day, every season for 3 to 4 hours a time, right? Every wrestling practice we left, there was a fog in the entire room, a thick fog every single time. And when other sports people, and I say sports people because like football players and swimmers and a lot of people that want to join the wrestling team, cross country guys, right? Oh, that hurt. The worst part about it is that you don't understand how difficult that is, right? Wrestling is a different sport in and of itself, because the worst part is that it's a team sport, but it depends on your individual effort. And that's something that I found so valuable in the military.
You don't get better in wrestling unless you have good teammates.
Exactly. It takes everybody in that room.
And so we've gone to, one of the things, and I'll tell you this, this is something that the Olympic Committee has done, and I think I give them credit for it. And I don't know, again, we started it in the 80s, and it's become, they would bring you in for a camp for 2 weeks. And during that 2 weeks, you got everybody to wrestle each other.
Mm-hmm.
So you basically, you'd work out. Like I remember my camp, I had Bruce Baumgartner, I had Matt Ghaffari, I had, Dennis Kozlowski, who just passed away. We had Jim Shear. We'd there'd probably be 3 people per weight class, maybe 4. They'd bring everybody in for a camp, and then you would just basically work out, and then, but what it did is expose you to the, to good guys, and and you'd be in the room with really good people working out.
Oh yeah.
And so you don't always get that in other sports. And imagine in a heyday, let's say the Bulls and, whatever, the Bulls and the Pistons having a practice every, for 2 weeks playing each other just to get better.
Mm-hmm.
Or, the Lakers and
it's not really heard of. The competition's completely different, right? So like, as you're mentioning, Coach Olson and Coach Pendleton was my 2 primary wrestling coaches growing up. Coach Pendleton's son, Chris, and probably Willie. Willie, I think, moved through pretty well, and also, he's gonna kill me for this. I can't remember his name. It's a J. Jacob. Yep, that's his name. And I am not gonna sound like an asshole now because I remembered it. But the way I remembered it was their cute little brother, fucking Jacob, right? And they would come into the wrestling room, and me and Chris wrestled from 7th, ever since I was a kid. And this was the kind of the weird thing about the rooms, right? They, like you were saying, every weight class and every team kind of transcended each other. So the farm boys and the middle school and the high school were all kind of very well integrated all throughout the phases of, elementary, middle school, and high school. And because of that, we got to see and know each other and really elevate the skills and those the mentality to be tough, right? And to be able to say, hey, I remember, going head to head for hours against, Ray and Trey and all of the guys, Nick that I grew up with, Craig,
See, that's another thing. That's another thing too that people don't realize about California. You got a lot of farmers out there.
Oh yeah.
Everybody thinks it's, of course you have San Diego, LA, San Francisco.
Mauricio Batalla was the other one that I grew up wrestling to.
But you get outside of LA, you go to places like Bakersfield, and there's a lot of farm. You go north, there's Ukiah. There's a lot of farmland in and it's those people are, there's a lot of farm hands in California. People don't realize that. There's a lot of cowboys out there. Cattle farmers and the like.
Frankie Mendonca.
Yeah.
Milk farmer. No, well, not milk farmer, but dairy farmer.
And so when you start looking at, sports, it comes from a huge, comes from a different background. I think one of the other issues too, that you don't see in, that is, it's unlikely that you don't see it as much as other sports, is that once you wrestle with with a teammate, you're you can be on a basketball team and not really be friends. You can be on a football team. There's 50 other players, so you're not necessarily going to be a team. But if you're with a wrestling teammate, your bond is a lot higher because you're in the room, you're in close proximity with them every day. And and
sharing hotel rooms, all of us piling in on one bed because we didn't get enough fundraiser.
Wow. I remember I got
fundraisers.
Well, and it's different, and now it's different because there are like Rudis. I don't know if you're familiar with Rudis, but they've done a very good job of sponsoring lower events, and even Nike has a lot of the camps. So they're just it's with the rise of MMA, the rise of wrestling, has gone up too, and I think the rise of with female wrestlers is that they're it's a sport that can keep them competitive.
Oh yeah.
So that it's open to anybody. Where basketball, you've got to have different skill set. Baseball, and that's one of the things that you got to thank Ronda Rousey for, has been with the rise of women's MMA. Mm-hmm. A lot more women are going into MMA. Savchenko, and prime example. There are more people going into MMA, females, than have before, and the quality of MMA fights, if you watch female, have gone up also.
Tremendously.
The skill set, and that only happens after time. So I think that's important. The other thing is now is you also got to take a look at the future of our military. Mm-hmm. We are going to start fighting some asymmetrical warfare. We don't know what that's going to look like. No one does. If we fight, we start taking on the cartel. That's going to be a completely different war than we've ever engaged in. Yeah. And I don't know that we're prepared for it. But if you have the skills that you taught in wrestling, whatever you want to call it, dedication, discipline, making weight, and you integrity. The other thing is with operations going up, wrestlers seem to be in much better physical shape.
That is something that I would say hand over fist. That, again, I go back to the Navy, and the experiences that I had were, I've never been a strong runner. Olson will tell you right away a huge grand story of me in running. And what I can say is No, never been a good runner. I could swim for days like a fish, right? Super strong, kind of got that deep to eat strength. But at the end of the day, wrestling gets you prepared not just physically, but mentally to challenge yourself and push through hurts. And this is something that I thank God every day for the Marines that I served with and the people that I wrestled with, because getting hurt was normal. You're gonna hurt. It's gonna be painful. Being injured is a very different thing, right? And having gone through a
Right.
bunch of different injuries my whole life was something that having that determination that most Marines have, I think naturally, mental wise, Marines are naturally good wrestlers, right? Give them more skills, more support, more influence, more ability to perform what they're good at and be who they truly are, right? I've always noticed that too. Like you bring in different cultures, the farm boys, the agricultural people that came in. One of my strongest people I wrestled. Okay, all of them came from a very very difficult lives where they worked in the morning, they wrestled and went to school, and then they wrestled in the evening, and then they had to go to work at night, right? And this is the kind of lifestyle for many kids in our rural areas, right? Just to begin
Right.
with, because of the need to help the family to provide, right? This is kind of the drawback of California. I think California provides a very adverse circumstance for a lot of people not in these hubs. And if you're not within certain realms of communities, it's very difficult to get these dollars to pay for school. And so if your grades aren't this or your grades aren't that, I loved how wrestling and football provided pathways for people that were
And
never
and and
never
it
going to see it.
and it has. And then one of the other issues too that you got to take a look at too is that a lot of the lessons you learn in sport carry with you, in life, and that is going to be one of the things, the key factors in playing sport. And people that play sports have a higher self esteem. They don't get bullied as much.
They're more
Yeah,
assertive. Yeah,
yeah.
they advocate very well. I've noticed that a lot of the guys like yourself, let's kind of roll into that with Veteran Radio Syndicate, right? Being able to take on a challenging conversation and be confrontational, I think is one of the better aspects of a lot of gentlemen that are kind of discussing things now. That's how we
Well,
met.
we've been
So,
doing we here's one of the issues. We have a lot of contributors in vet radio. And we try, what we've been focusing is on current events, and there are some other things we do. We report. We try not to have a bias with it. We try to
mhm,
report a military themed show, and we talk about training. The problem is, one of the things that we've tried to focus on, is we try to have honest conversations.
mhm,
And what it seems like in today's world is you need an honest broker, you need a referee, you need somebody to tell you, hey, listen, we're all going to have we're going to have difference of opinions. We're going to have, I mean, we can't even, we can't agree on whether Whataburger is better than In-N-Out, let alone, on something that's complicated.
yeah,
And so that's going to be an issue. So, hey, how about we have an honest conversation that maybe the way I feel or the way I want to solve a problem might be different than yours, but let's have an honest conversation about that. Because at the end of the day, you want to have a better quality of life, you want to have better governance, you want to have a better economy, you want to have all these things. If you're going to have them, you you know one of the things that we've had is people have become intellectually uh, intellectually lazy. They become dishonest in conversations. And what we've tried to focus on and say, hey, listen, here's the issue. Could we play party politics and be all right wing or all left wing? And we're like, no. Here's the issue. This is what the news is. Make up your mind by yourself about it.
mhm.
How you feel about it. And that's what we try to focus on. And it seems to be working because our viewership is up. We're at 130,000 followers. We're averaging about 17 million people per month reach. So we're doing okay there and
Solid.
getting, we're not, and we're trying not to take shots at people, and it becomes so easy to do so. If you're an honest broker, we kind of follow the old Mongolian, there's a Mongolian custom called, if your guests are kind, then so should you be.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is today is people find happiness in hating others, and that's a difficult thing that's a difficult thing to overcome.
It really is, especially if you acquire momentum or any kind of validating incentive towards that action being good or bad, right? And I know it's excruciatingly difficult in today's media in general. Okay, has been doing the show for a little over 12 years now, and the things that I've noticed in the depth of conversation, the level of dissonance within recognizing any alternative to even approach a conversation, right? It's so vile in the community. It reminds me of that movie, The Kingsman, or whatever it was, where Samuel L. Jackson and the dude, I can't remember his name, but the movie's really good. And they modulate some kind of a frequency that makes people go crazy and hate each other and go angry. And that's essentially the defense or this weapon that the movie kind of goes after. And I go, that's kind of the temperament of a lot of people right now. And in all aspects, like I wish I could just throw a stone and only hit one aspect of it, right? But the worst part of it is it's mirroring societal normative, not societal, what's the word here? Just anything regular isn't regular anymore, right? A lot of my friends, we talk about this, like being a gentleman with standard, upholding standards and having ethics and moralities and integrity. And you see the type of people succeeding, and you look at the world and the society of itself and the way that we highlight these people that could use, I would say, a refresher course on some basic gentleman shit, right? Being, integrity. Don't talk out the side of your neck. Don't look down on each
Right.
other. Lift each other up, right? There's a lot of aspects that I feel, wrestling gave me that transcendent skill set to see.
Well,
But also now with the media aspect, it's just...
Here's the thing that sports does and the Marine Corps does, and it brings, varied backgrounds together.
Mm-hmm.
And so it teaches you how to get along with people from different cultures. Because if you go to the barracks on any Friday night, you see, there are hippies, there are, the Puerto Ricans, or the Mexicans, there's the, the guys from the city, the New Yorkers, farm dudes from Ohio. They're all together, and and they're sitting there getting along. And I think that, part of the one of the problems we have in America is the fact is that we have a tendency to migrate. We tribal. We stay with our own kind,
Mm-hmm.
and as a result of that, we don't seem to get we don't seem to look at outside views, and as a result of that, we kind of live in an echo chamber because it's easy. So
That is so true, right? The acceptable lies over the uncomfortable truths, right? Or tolerable lies over uncomfortable truths, something like that. And that's so true, because when you look at the problems the thing that connected us, right? And that was something that, we're still discussing at length, offline, and figuring it out and how to implement different stuff and discuss things at higher levels of the community, right? And being in the position that you are with Veteran Radio Syndicate, right? How do you see not just your ability, but your hosts and the formatting and the style that you guys bring to not just the topic of current conversation, but really instilling those type of ethics and morals that you find true?
So what we're trying to do is basically, what we're trying to do is give different views on current events. And right now we're, as we've been, we have a few hosts right now. Um, we're trying to be an online news outlet. We're focused on that because I think one of the problems that we have seen, and especially when we started out, we used to have a news program every day, and we would catch people up on the news, and it worked out well. We got away from that and kind of went a little more entertainment, and then we realized, wait a second, people aren't being honest about the reporting the news.
Oh yeah.
And so we said, hey, let's go back to that kind of format. We're going to do what we think is the top 5 stories of the day, the top 5 or 6, and then do our research, make sure we're giving the right information, that we're not doing clickbait. Like one of the things that everybody was quick to publish, but it was a lie, was that you had that Hillary, Chelsea Clinton got $84 million from from USAID and used it on her wedding.
About that.
Yeah, and that's a complete fabrication, because you can go to U.S. government spends and look up where the money is going. But people wanted to migrate to that because they wanted
it to be true. Yeah.
And, so we try not to do that. And, we've had congressmen on our shows. We've got an interview coming up with the new director of the VA.
Nice. Doug Collins.
So, yeah, Doug Collins. And he's he's a Air Force veteran chaplain. And so we've got people coming on board, and we try not to, you're always going to have a little bit of bias, but we're trying not to be biased, because we're trying to, like I said, we're trying to give people the best information possible, and let them make a decision from it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And if we could do that, we think we can be, we could add to the, what do you call it? That we could add to the, to the conversation, because one of the things is that too, that, it's just like BAMSIS in the Marine Corps. The better information you have, the more capable you are of going to battle.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
And people have kind of, I don't know if they strayed away from that, or they just said, hey, listen, we want to migrate towards bias. But, I think that the problem with that has been, and we look at it, because we've got, 11, 12 different, contributors. And we have people that are in SF. We have a U.S. Navy SEAL. We have we have people that are, we have people that are, very well, established. One of the guys that we're doing shows with starting this month is Lieutenant Colonel Chris Poppy. And he is going to give, he's going to go over, court martials and Article 15s that have been in the military. He is the one that represented Hassan at the Fort Hood shooting.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So basically you're going to have, you can look him up, and we're going to start doing shows, because here's the thing. Even though he was, even our system of justice, even the worst people among us have the right to a trial.
Yep.
And I mean, and honestly,
it's true.
I mean, what he did was, deplorable. What he did was horrible. He got
all the words, inhumane.
Inhumane. But under our system of governance and our judicial system, he was entitled to a fair defense. And now that is, but so he's been a contributor to us. We're going to start doing a show with him to basically go over, criminal procedures in the military.
Because that's a very difficult place if you're in, period, just trying to figure out which way is up. Eddie Gallagher just went through that a couple years ago.
Well, and think about this. I don't know if Eddie Gallagher would, however he was, but Eddie Gallagher was the process that he went through, so many different people did not know the process, and people were commenting, you don't have in the military, you don't have Fourth Amendment rights.
Mm-hmm.
A person, you can go into anybody's barracks room or anybody's car at any time without you don't need a warrant. You don't need a warrant.
Yeah.
Your Fifth Amendment rights are not the same civilian to military. They're and then where you can impeach character in the military. You can't. You can impeach character. Your SRB is fair record in the military, where maybe it's not in the civilian world. So there's a lot of it, and people were making these assumptions based on the lack of knowledge. So one of the things we're trying to do is basically, get people more educated, and more, and to say, hey, listen, this is, people that if you have better information, you've never lost a battle because you had more information.
Yeah. That is true. That is so true, the way you look at it.
Yeah. And then so, one of the things that we want to grow, and we want to use, On Target for Vets to help out veterans, to show them some stuff to do. I coached at, I worked out at Westside Barbell. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Westside Barbell is a gym in Columbus, Ohio. It has produced the United States' strongest people ever.
Nice. And that's for powerlifting?
Yeah.
Okay.
And not just powerlifting, but performance. I help run a camp that we got people ready for the NFL. And so, when I was at Ohio State, I wrote and testified for the Barry Bonds case. So we're using all of that information to basically say, hey, listen, this is what we could do to help you. Because, if one of the things you develop when you're an injured vet is you develop something called pain aversion. You don't want to do an exercise that will help you. And because you're hurting, you're going, oh, this hurts. Oh, this hurts. Well, yeah, it hurts because you're not using it. You're not doing the exercises that would help you feel better.
Yeah. That's so amazing that you bring that up, man. That is so amazing that you're bringing that up right now.
And, so you get people out there that are, so that what they do instead of going to, and we're going to show some exercises you could basically do sitting in your chair or at home that doesn't need, a lot of, that doesn't need a lot of expensive equipment. So that, that's where we're focusing on. And, saying, hey, listen, you could do these, something as simple as, toe touches while you're sitting down that stretch out your piriformis and your sciatic.
That is so awesome that you're fucking saying this right now, dude, because I had yet another fall just this past week. And it's, I'm assuming, my wife's assuming too, that it has to do with some form of piriformis syndrome.
Yeah. And let me tell you, the reason that is common is that once you develop it, you don't do exercises to help you.
That is so true, because I'm literally afraid, and I tell my everybody, my doctors, all my doctors, I have a team of doctors, right? And I go, look, I'm terrified of doing what I know is necessary because I don't have the pain modulation, right? And that's something that it goes hand in hand. When I was it was a few years ago, 2014 through. So when I started on the caregiver program, my wife and I, right, I was on morphine, and I'm not a huge advocate for opiates or whatever it is. I'm more for the answers and solutions and outcomes, right? And I told my doctor, I'm like, look, let's titrate off, because they started sending me all these notes. Hey, you're going to die in your sleep. I'm like, yeah, roger that. Okay. And then we titrated down and eventually off. I was supposed to just titrate down so I could maintain some form of a pain modulation, right? And after that occurrence, they just cut me off cold turkey, which I don't advise anybody to go through with morphine or any drugs. And although I did everything right, I couldn't maintain the amount of physical therapy that I was doing at that point in time, right? I wasn't doing any hardcore lifting. I grew up hardcore lifting and wrestling and everything, right? But at this point in time, like what you're saying, this is the reason why I love it so fucking much. The simple things, right? Sitting down, standing back up, sitting down, standing back up. How's your pain? Let's go slow, right? This is my physical therapist. They send me in-home homebound occupational therapy and physical therapy now. And we're working and integrating these tactics, these techniques, right? How do I get better at this, right? You bring up the piriformis, and that's ringed my bell, okay? Because this past few weeks, week and a half, I would say solid, I've been unable to walk. I had another fall, and all of the pain is escalating. And then me and my wife started doing a lot more research into certain things like burn pit exposures and toxic exposures, and why my neuropathy or loss of sensation to my limbs may be causing it. And I tell her, well, this may be it, right? And all I know is that it doesn't fucking matter. I got to push through the pain. I got to figure out how to modulate it, whether it's with, this naturopathic modality or this naturopathic modality, or in combination with pharmaceutical, whatever works, right? But I'm at that point. It was a breaking point, because when you said pain aversion, that's been my life since 2017, and it's been a fucking hell, right?
So, for example, I'll give you an example. I guarantee you, in your treatment, has anybody recommended protein peptides for you?
No.
And that's a simple thing. BPC 157, TB 500 would help you, with some of the neuropathy.
You're blowing my mind right now, because my physical therapist brought that up too, and I'm looking into it balls deep. That is
and then
awesome.
And then so one of the things that we cover, and which is we try to have this conversation in the open. You might need to get on testosterone replacement therapy.
I just started it, in fact.
Yeah. And people are so resistant to it. And again, we say to people, you might need to detox. You might need to get on. You might need to go get some lab work or blood work done to see where you're at. But a lot of people are averse to that because it's counter. So what one of the biggest critiques of the VA, and before you respond to this, is we have created people that are medically healthy as opposed to physically healthy.
Okay.
I don't know if you understand that. Where medically healthy,
I'm kind of tracking, but
it's medically healthy is you're on blood, you're on blood pressure medicine, you're on cholesterol medicine, you're taking 4 or 5 medicines to stay healthy. Now you are in good medical, you're in good medical shape. You're not in good physical shape. You can't go run a PFT. You can't go bench. You're not doing anything in the gym. You're taking the pills. They're keeping you healthy, but you're a product of pharma.
Yeah, and that was my worst experience.
And the problem with the VA is that's the funnel that they're doing right now. That's the funnel that they're approaching. And instead of saying, hey, you need to be physically healthy, listen, we've got drugs. We will give you drugs. You'll be medically healthy
within their parameters of definition, right?
We'll give you some tramadol for the pain. We'll give you, whatever. I don't know. I don't know what people are taking for. I don't know what people are taking.
It's actually been a huge pain point, like how corporate will say. It's been the opiate pandemic has created a lot of things we have to look into as a society.
And people are doing that and going, well, wait a second. If you're doing all of this, maybe, just maybe, you're not in physically good shape. You're medically healthy, but you're medically healthy because you're on pills and potions. How about we transfer that and get you to be physically healthy where, you could do it. And one of the things I want to point out, I've got a few more minutes before
Okay.
we got to start wrapping up, but I want to point out something that people don't think about being physically healthy. 1986, I was in Australia. I was on the USS Tarawa. One of your squidbirds fell down on the mooring lines
Uh-huh.
when we were coming back from coming back out of town. He fell and tripped, twisted his ankle pretty bad. Now, I don't know if alcohol was involved. I didn't care. He was in pain. I carried him from the dock up inside the ship, up on the gangplank, on the plank to go into the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Got him there, carried him up the rise in the whale deck to sick bay, because I said, if we wait to go get a stretcher or something like that, it's going to take longer. I just lived, basically. Fireman carried him up, and I said, hey, this guy's, we got him there, and it was probably a length of 130 yards. The point is that I was in good enough physical shape to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so now this guy, I didn't know the guy. Who was just another squid on the damn ship. But if I would have waited, how long would he have had to been in pain if I had to wait to get a stretcher down there to get, it was just easier. Sometimes you're going to be in position. You've got to be physically fit to take care of your fellow soldiers, squids, Marines,
or
otherwise
even your family.
Even your family. If you had to carry your wife out of the burning house, would you be able to?
See, right now, that is something that drives me. Okay.
Or would you be able to carry your kids out?
Absolutely insane. No. And that's something that I tell my doctors every time. And, I like to focus in on, we can end on this note too, because I'm so stoked about On Target for Vets. And I really want to really advocate and connect with you on a deeper level, right? And of course, participate on a deeper level, because.
Well, one of the things we should do in the next, I'll show you some of the exercises you could do, and you can basically, you could do some of them and see what your response is from them.
Fuck yeah.
Because I think a lot of the problems is a lot of the things that you're looking at, you don't, a lot of the things that people look at, they don't understand the second and third level effects. Doing push-ups every day strengthen your shoulders and all that to be able to, I mean, you don't have to do 1,000 push-ups a day. Do 30 or 40 of them.
Right. Do something.
Do something. Little things add up to big things. And I think the other thing is that I've seen is that a lot of veterans feel bad because, they can't do the stuff they used to do in the fleet. Well, no one can. Yeah. But no one is asking you. That's not your mission anymore. Yeah. Your mission isn't to be a rifleman in a Marine, in a Marine infantry company. Your mission is to be a better
human being.
Better human being, and have a better quality of life. And I think that that's where they, people kind of lose focus of that. Your, missions change, wellness does not.
See, and that's bulletproof facts right there. That's something that I combat personally with every day. Every day God blesses me with another day above ground, with a heartbeat and a breath in my lungs. I feel absolutely obligated to put my best foot forward to try to overcome these conditions or whatever is wrong with me or right with me, both. How do I improve on the good things that are good, right? And that's something that I'm really looking forward to, right? Especially with you and especially with Veterans Radio Syndicate and On the Target with Veterans and everything else you guys got going on. But as a whole, just talking right now about the BPC 157, the TB 500s, and the NAD pluses and the testosterone replacement, this was a place that I was getting into.
But a lot of people are afraid of it. But a lot of people, don't know that they're out there, and number two, it's you have to be you have to kind of get out of the normal, pills and potion practices.
The normal bullshit, really. Yeah. That's what I've experienced. And to kind of harp in on it as we wrap up, it's something to me as I step forward with ADAX Entertainment and our shows and as we're building out and everything else, I'm even looking into Voc Rehab. I have an appointment coming up next week. I had no clue how to prepare for it, but for the past few days, I've been reaching out, asking, hey, I know you did this. I know you did that. How did this work? What am I supposed to say? How am I supposed to prepare? How do I send this? What is it? All of those steps that add, those small things that add up to big things. I'm really looking forward to it in a different way, brother. And I mean it in such a passionate way, because my children were even talking to me the other day. We were catching up and rapping about how we've lived at this house for the past 8 years. The last house I've lived in any kind of place, I think, is now longer this house most than anywhere I've lived in my life. When I was a kid, I grew up in Lemoore. Great hometown, great place to launch my life into. And now me and my kids are looking at a better path forward for us. Better ways equal better days. That's our new slogan. All right. And in this conversation, we've developed and discussed so many things that in my eyes are super important, not only to just bring up like right now, but how to continue it forward every day, tomorrow, the next day, and to really connect, not just with yourself, but with the Veteran Radio Syndicate, of course, and on the target for veterans, but also provide that resources.
And that's what we're trying to do is across all the things to help people, veterans, to have a better life. And that's at the end of the day, you really can't ask for much more than that. So,
and you said it's quality of life, right? That's something that personally I battle with. Again, I don't feel as though I deserve a lot because I'm not doing much in my life. And that's something that my wife really had to ring my bell about. Why do you have such a negative speak? Why do you have such negative perspective? And I go, because I don't know. I'm working on it, right? And over these past 15 years, I went away from the alcohol. I went away from the pharmacologies, right? I went away from these ideations and perspectives and philosophies that had me entrapped in my own fleshy tomb, so to speak. And now even this conversation, and it may not seem it for you, but it's one of the biggest conversations I've had in years, discussing the BPC 157, discussing the other.
And that's something that's not being told to veterans, where that could be a simple solution for injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not it's not being suited. Anyway, I've got to get off.
All right,
here.
No problem, brother. We just want to say thank you very much, and I'll end it right there before we wrap up.
And then in the future we'll do this again, where we have more, a little bit more time, and we can go in more depth. But I just want to close this for the people that are going to listen to this. Go get multiple views on whatever is ailing you. Go look at, go to a physical therapist, go to a personal trainer, go to a doctor, don't just take one person's view on your health, because not everybody is going to argue for the same outcome.
Right. That is so powerful, brother. Well, thank you for your time, everybody. This was George Pardos. And we had a great conversation about Veteran Radio Syndicate and On the Target for Veterans. Be on the lookout. We'll be doing a lot more episodes with him.